Hi, my name is Madeline and welcome to this meditative watercolor tutorial. This is part 2. I made a tutorial a couple weeks back called Meditative Watercoloring, where I go over all the basic supplies that I use with different techniques. This is a continuation of that tutorial, and I'm going to share some techniques in this video that I didn't in the last. Stick around for the very end of the tutorial and I'll list out all the supplies that I used. I will be starting off with my Paul Rubens hot pressed watercolor paper block. I have a little jar of water and my favorite brush to use this with. This is my Princeton Neptune Mottler, and today I'm going to be using paints, watercolors from M. Graham and Schmincke. So this is 100% cotton watercolor paper. I think that's important since we'll be using so much water, and I find that hot pressed paper, sometimes the watercolor moves a little bit more because there's not as much texture for the water and the paint to fight with. So in today's tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by putting pink straight from my watercolor tubes on my paper first. In the last tutorial, I wet my paper first and then I dropped the paint onto wet paper, so this is sort of reversing that process. You can go through the tubes a little bit faster, but I personally really like how the watercolor blooms look when I use this technique. This is Opera Rose. I like putting colors together that would mix well. If I were to be mixing it on a palette, since essentially what we're doing is we're adding water and we're letting all of these colors flow together. This is Dioxazine Purple, one of my favorite colors. So I'm adding that in as well. And then now I'm going to grab my little water cup and my brush. This is a 2-inch flat mottler, and I just feel like it delivers a really good amount of water, and it just makes these watercolor blooms like so pretty. I recommend using the widest flat brush you have. You just get more water and more. Oops, I spilled a little bit of water on my paper already, but that's okay because we're going to be adding tons more water. And all I'm doing is I'm kind of letting the very bottom edge of the brush touch the paper, and honestly the paint immediately just moves on its own. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse the brush a little bit, and then I'm going to add more water to the top, and you can see I'm not even doing anything right now, and you can see the paint is still moving with the water. And I'm just going to add some water on the top of the paper here, and the paint will basically go wherever there's water, and I am adding as much water as I can to the paper, and I'm just letting the watercolor do its thing. I mean, it's completely magical to me. I could paint and do these all day long and I wouldn't get sick of them. So there is still like some chunks of paint in the center. So what I'm doing now is I'm just really rinsing the brush well, and I'm going to sort of drop a little bit more water on those globs of paint that we have at that sort of like horizon line, I guess you could say it. I do try to keep the watercolor and the water on the block, but it is kind of a messy project, so just to be mindful of that. I have paper towels and stuff around for me to kind of use if I need it, and I just like tilting the paper and watching the paint move. Look at the opera mixing in with the dioxazine purple. I mean, it's just magical. And this next part's completely optional. You don't need to come in with a round brush, but sometimes I like to come in with a round brush and sort of mix the color a little bit more. There's water everywhere, so when I introduce the brush, it's going to start pushing the paint a little bit. But that way I don't have like huge wet globs of paint on the paper afterwards. And I just like to tilt, and one of the colors that I used was granulating, so you can kind of see some of the granulation on the top. But these colors are just mixing so pretty. Now let's move on to another page, and we're going to do the same technique except with different colors. So this time we are going to use Prussian blue, opera pink, and neutral tint. And if I'm being honest, of all the different techniques, I think this is my favorite one, when you put straight up paint straight to the paper and then use a nice flat brush to introduce the water. I find that you get the most pigment this way. I can see some people feeling like it's wasteful paint-wise. I try not to squeeze out like too much, but it's just a different technique and it's sort of like a different feel. And so, like I said earlier, I like to pick colors that would mix well together. So that's kind of my thought process behind which colors I use. So now I'm grabbing my Princeton Neptune modeler brush again, grabbing lots of clean water. My brush is pretty much loaded with water, and I'm just sort of letting the very bottom part of the brush touch the paper, and I'm letting all of it just sort of blend in together. And I love watching this. It's so meditative for me. I guess it's abstract art, but I just love seeing all of the colors move. And then I just let it dry on its own. I don't use a hot air tool because it's so much water. And just be careful not to move around with it and spill it if you do move your block. I just want to go over the supplies again. I used a hot pressed watercolor block by Paul Rumens. It is 100% cotton watercolor paper. I find that hot pressed paper works better with this type of abstract watercolor. The brush that I used primarily to get the water on was a Princeton Modeler Neptune 2-inch, and then I used round brushes too to sort of kind of move the watercolor after all the water's on the paper, but you can use any round. I think I used like a silver brush and a Polina Bright round. The tubes of watercolor that I used for the very first project was M. Graham Anthracnone Blue, Dioxazine Purple, and Schmincke Opera Rose. And then in the second one, it's M. Graham Prussian Blue, Neutral Tint, and Opera Rose. I have all the links down below in the video description. And always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments or find me on social media, Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook, and message me there. I hope you found this video helpful and relaxing. If you liked this tutorial, please hit the like button. It's a really small way to help my channel grow. And if you enjoy my content, use the following QR codes to either find me on Patreon or Instagram.